mentioned some of the rise of some of these, data operations type workloads, analytics, machine learning, and now as we get into possibly generative AI and other things, organizations are they're enticed by the potential, the business potential of these new technologies, but at the same time, there is insane levels of risk to, as you open up things like all the regulatory type information, customer data, all this sort of stuff, open to these new technologies and get them accessible everywhere because of all the different location boundaries and the different rules. So again, that just reinforces that importance of mobility and agility.
And this I would say is another place where data orchestration versus the traditional model of data management by copy from outside really comes into play, because orchestration, sorry for the background, my 1-year-old is not feeling very well today, and she came down with something. The modern world, working from home. But the data orchestration, because the movement is from behind the file system, now that the file system is outside of the infrastructure, it allows you to maintain ownership and control of the data, even while it might be physically distributed across different clouds or different data centers, or even across entirely different organizations. And what this means is that the access controls that are on that golden copy, that are on your data, the access controls and the audit trail, all of those things are maintained irrespective of where the data is positioned and where it's moved, because that movement is now from behind the gatekeeper, not out front of the gatekeeper. When you're making copies, you're basically opening Pandora's box, and these things are scattered to the wind. There's no way to audit them. There's no way to tell where all they've gone. But if people are able to access them from within the same file system, then you have the full audit trail, and you have up-to-date and most accurate access controls, and you can enforce compliance to regulation by being able to state where that data is allowed to be stored, where it's allowed to be consumed, because all of that now is under the purview of the data orchestration layer of the global file system.
Yes, yeah, I love that, because if I kind of play that back, the controls that you want align with the data are now aligned with the data rather than the location or the system, right? Which limits what's possible or creates complexity as across you move. Because the other big thing that I didn't even bring up at the beginning is all these different locations all have different experiences. They all have different people running it. It's tough to get the training across different environments. So the more commonality that you can have across in terms of how you access, that just pays dividends in terms of operational efficiency as well as value to the business.
Yeah, that uniformity in it. And this is why ultimately we need an agent that represents the data and is independent of the storage systems or storage services or infrastructure providers. And that's really one way to think about the data orchestration layer, is it's something that is representing the interests of the data and of the application and organization, expressed in the data in a way that's independent of the infrastructure.
I think it's worth mentioning, because it may not be clear to everyone who's listening, that point you just made, David, is really important, that as organizations are driving these data initiatives and the topics you and Scott are discussing, in a lot of cases, they're still going to want to use hardware investments they've already made, infrastructure, servers, storage, that type of thing. And in this data orchestration model, they're able to do that. We're representing what to do with the data, but not requiring a big forklift upgrade to a bunch of new infrastructure.
That's right. I think you can't do this as an infrastructure
Exactly.
piece. It has to be something that gives you the ability to leverage all multi-vendor, multi-cloud, and use anybody's infrastructure.
It's a great point. I want to add on that, because I talk a lot with CIOs and buyers, and one of my favorite comments, because I talk a lot about infrastructure modernization, transformation, these sorts of themes. And someone asked me, goes, Scott, what's the difference between modernization, transformation, and just buying new stuff? I've been buying new stuff forever. How is this actually different? And I think, David, you hit on and Molly, you too, hit on a very, very important aspect of it, because it is this idea of, no, we're delivering new capabilities, new transformational ways in which you can access and harness your data that are abstracted or not necessarily tied with the actual infrastructure behind the scenes. So you can leverage your existing investments. You can integrate faster technology when you need to, but the capabilities, the benefits are not necessarily tied to a net new piece of net new system thing that you have to rip and replace. You don't have to rip and replace all your existing investments, which is incredibly valuable, or you're able to leverage some existing investments. The ability to deliver those transformational business capabilities in terms of delivering operational efficiency is really what helps define what becomes truly transformational.
And that goes directly to, again, the cost structure, right? And you're talking here about efficiency and utilization and being able to, put data, where it makes sense. And this is another interesting point. If you want to really put a point on how broken the relationship between data and infrastructure is today, just consider that I would argue, and this would be an interesting thing for you to poll your readers on, is, the organizational structure of the data, the way that the data is grouped, the directories you put it in, the groupings or file systems, the bundles they put it in, I would argue is more dictated by how you're going to pack it onto the infrastructure. This data needs to go over here, so I have to group it this way, this data over here. We are letting the tail wag the dog. The infrastructure is dictating the very organizational structure of the data to us, and it shouldn't. The data ought to be able to be granularly moved behind the scenes so that the specific types of files, even though they might be in the same directory, that don't need the kind of performance levels, those can be tiered down, and the types of files that are needed for this type of application or that over on this data center or that data center, you don't have to rearrange the logical presentation of the data to get a different physical positioning of the data on the infrastructure. And the fact that we do that today is really indicative of the problem on how you're breaking it down. And by having the abstraction layer and allowing you to use all of your existing resources, you can now get better utilization of their particular strengths and weaknesses.
I was just going to jump in because that particular question that we had, I actually asked that a little bit ago. And what was really fascinating is I think you're almost, the problem may actually be worse than what you just talked about. Is now in the era of multi-clouds and everything, organizations are doing a little bit more analysis up front, because with cloud, and if you put in the wrong cloud provider, you can, in different workloads, it has different impacts on cost. But in terms of on-premises environments and different technologies, we ask, hey, what type of logic do you do up front? Everything else, how do you actually approach this? And I want to say, I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I want to say the dominant means was, we just throw it on whichever one has the most available capacity, which you're like, you don't look at the performance characteristics, you don't look at the availability. And I know that's not true for everyone. If you're watching this, I'm sure you do some more logic, but it was really scary how many organizations.
Well, having enough space is the first order problem.
Exactly. Let's just make sure we have enough space. Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting.